Hey, how's it going? Quick question. What does it mean to be human? And what would you be willing to trade your humanity for? Let's think about it. So here's my question. If you willingly trade an arm for a prosthetic, which is better than your original arm in every way, is anything of value lost during that transaction? Imagine the new arm is stronger, lighter, infinitely repairable, zero maintenance, doesn't need you to work out, has more accurate sensory receptors than a biological arm, can't feel pain, whatever. Question is, are you less human with that arm? Well, obviously there's people with prosthetic arms and legs who are probably a bit offended by the implication here. I'd say replacing your arm with a robotic one doesn't meaningfully make you less human, but think about it. Where is the limit? Is there one? See, I think of the way that we categorize objects like constellations of related ideas, not just a simple definition. If you try to reduce an object to a one-sentence definition, I think you tend to get a pretty stupid result a lot of the time. Like, what is a chair? Something you sit on? Okay, but you can sit on lots of things. You can sit on a table, you can sit on a large wheel of cheese, you can sit on a pile of copies of the Communist Manifesto. Are those all types of chair? You can sit on a horse. When you look at a horse, do you think, ah, yes, a chair? That'd make for an interesting family dinner. Oh, sorry, Grandma, Dad's already taken the communism chair, so you've been allocated the wild stallion we found peering mournfully over a nearby landfill yesterday. I think the way this actually works is any definition is associated with a network of related concepts, and the more things that apply that are conceptually grouped tightly around one concept, the more likely you are to conclude that the thing in question is that thing. That was a terrible explanation. Alright, here's an example. If an object can be sat on, that could be a chair, but it could be almost any solid object. But if it's got 4 legs, then it really could be a chair. But it also could be a horse. But if it's an inanimate object with 4 legs that can be sat on, now it's much more likely to be a chair, but it could still be a table. But if it's an inanimate object with 4 legs and a backrest and armrests and a matching footstool and it's got padding and it's covered with fabric, and at that point it's probably a chair. And you can get rid of some of these fairly core aspects and still call it a chair so long as the center of mass of all the concepts is vaguely centered on the same definition. Like, I have this IKEA chair in my house. This thing doesn't have 4 legs, it has 2 legs? Or 1 leg, depending on how you think about it. Still clearly a chair though. Like, check out this vehicle. Is this a car? Yeah. But what about this one? And then this is a quad bike. So where's the line exactly? Does this car become a quad bike if you just take off the steering wheel and replace it with some handlebars or something? There's probably some official definition of a quad bike that I'm not aware of, but the generalized answer is that it depends on your personal conceptual model of how objects interrelate with each other. So try and apply this to humans, right? There are obviously things in the constellation of related ideas around humans, right? We've got 2 arms and 2 legs and 23 pairs of chromosomes, but you could have an armless, legless person with an extra chromosome and they'd still be a human. There's a lot of stuff we associate with being a human that in practice you don't actually check, you just kind of assume to be true. I guess this kind of connects with the back and forth societal pissing match around transgenderism actually. You know, if the functional difference between a man and a woman in like 99% of interactions comes down to things like clothing and mannerisms and secondary sexual characteristics, could the concept just be defined as those things? Argue amongst yourselves on that one, I don't give a shit. Like, on one hand, things would be simpler if you can just put people in really clearly defined A or B piles and call it a day. On the other, one of the good things about living in a relatively free country is the ability to do whatever the fuck you want, so people in practice are going to behave in a way that's outside the lines, and it's not like we have an army of freelance penis inspectors to go door to door with a warrant to grope your undercarriage and give you a license to piss standing up, so I don't fucking know. Anyway, my point is that I'm basically doing this with respect to the concept of our shared humanity. Is our humanity effectively just our arms and legs and opposable thumbs? Like, is it that surface level, or is it something deeper? Is it our level of intelligence? You know, what is it? How much would a person have to transform before you no longer view them as a human being anymore? And does that even matter? Maybe we're conscious entities that just happen to be humaning right now, and the consciousness part matters and the human part is kind of more circumstantial. Like, if you slowly ship of Theseus all your limbs and organs away for robotic ones and replaced every nerve and neuron one at a time with something better, something synthetic, assuming the process lets you maintain your existing uninterrupted stream of consciousness, like, are you still human? And does it matter? And if it doesn't, what does actually matter? And by the way, speaking of the ship of Theseus, if you like my intro music, that was written by my older brother Ben, and he's in a band called Theseus. They released their first full album last month, and they've just put out a music video. So if you're into pretty heavy stuff, go give Ben some love, I'll leave the links in the description. Check them out, or I'm going to come over to your house and do this. Nepotism wins again. Anyway, back to transhumanism. See, if we start significantly changing human physiology with technology, we're presumably going to be optimizing for something, right? If you change something, you think that that something could be better. But what's better than human physiology, and why? If you design something, your design is trying to optimize for something, so what are we aiming at? I would wager that ultimately, we're probably going to end up optimizing for well-being. In other words, positively valenced sensations within consciousness. You know, for example, eating your favorite food, finding a new song or movie or video game that you're obsessed with, fucking someone that you're in love with, achieving everything you've ever wanted, right? These are all positively valenced experiences within consciousness. Meanwhile, knowing that you're hated by everyone and watching everyone you know and love get murdered and then having all your skin peeled off, those are all supremely negatively valenced experiences. The contents of consciousness is so variable in so many different dimensions that there aren't really any words to describe it properly, but if what we care about is just well-being and all of the other minutiae of conscious experience is essentially neutral, then that does reduce the complexity of understanding consciousness down to a one-dimensional problem. If reducing all the complexities of conscious experience to this sort of utilitarian analysis of well-being is vaguely valid, the idea would be that despite the wildly varying potential contents of consciousness, what actually matters is that well-being. You could say that seeking greater well-being is why you do literally anything. Like, we evolved to find sensations pleasurable that are beneficial for our survival. And so even now, all of our technology ultimately serves our primal instincts to try and find greater and greater sources of well-being, right? More food, more entertainment, more stimulation of one kind or another. Sure, you might have to do some corporate grind or whatever to be able to afford it, but that's kind of sold to you as worth it on the balance of well-being. Even when you choose to voluntarily withhold positive well-being by not eating an entire cake in one sitting, you seem to be doing that because you're betting that doing so in the long term will give you more well-being, right? You could gorge yourself now and be a fat, miserable shit afterwards, or you could be disciplined now and reap the greater rewards of feeling and looking healthy later. I think we can make a graph out of this, right? Like, imagine a person's lifespan as the x-axis on a graph, and the y-axis is the instantaneous well-being they're experiencing at a given moment, where -1 is the worst possible suffering, +1 is the best possible pleasure, and 0 is just you sitting on the couch feeling kind of contentedly indifferent. So if you have a person who's like mentally healthy and whatever, their goal seems to be to make the overall area under the curve representing their total lifespan as positive as possible. So responsible behavior often looks something like accepting a sharp decrease in well-being in your immediate future in exchange for more subtle positive effects on your long-term future, and those amount to more in the aggregate. Especially when repeated, things like this increase your well-being a lot over time, like eating healthily and exercising regularly and saving money. It might reduce your well-being in the moment because, you know, it'll cause some relative suffering, right? But they're beneficial overall if you consider the far future. And the opposite is mirrored too. If you eat garbage and you drink too much alcohol and you blow all your money on stupid crap, all of that makes the contents of consciousness more positively valenced in the immediate future, right? It's good immediately, but the cost is that your life will be shitter in the more distant future. Of course, in reality, there's so many effects happening all at once in your life that the well-being chart would be up and down all the time, right? You know, you're suffering because you're hungry, but then you eat something nice and you feel pleasure, but then you stub your toe and you're suffering again, and then the pain wears off, and then you're laughing at something on social media and it's all good again, and then you realize that last meme was actually kind of racist and you're probably going to hell for laughing at it, so you feel bad again. That's the well-being model as far as I see it. It reduces the infinite possibilities of all the qualia that could ever possibly occur within consciousness down to just one scalar quantity, defined as the continuum between pleasure and suffering. So if the question is, why would anyone want to become some cybernetically augmented human? It's because it's the ultimate well-being hack, right? You can't sprain an ankle if the ankle is made of titanium. You can't get lung cancer if your lungs are mechanical. And if you go as far as to become functionally immortal, then those good times that you're having can last as long as possible. And the total area under the curve of someone's life is going to be as positive and as long as it can possibly be. And this can be truer and truer the more advanced our approach to transhumanism gets. We're already doing early transhumanism. I'd count things as simple as like plastic surgery and hearing aids. Like if your grandmother's had a hip replacement, she's technically a cyborg. There's like body modding and gender reassignment and advanced prosthetics. I think these are all kind of the beginning of it. We're starting to be able to choose what our mortal bodies look like. But then there's things which are significantly more advanced, like what Neuralink is pointing to. That's obviously going to be huge if and when it happens. Like sooner or later, either optically or neurally, I'm sure we'll end up augmenting our visual experience of reality with some kind of display directly within your vision. It could be a good or a bad thing. We could also use neural implants to basically communicate telepathically, which would be awesome, but that's all small potatoes. Theoretically, you could have a human brain in a robot body, or a brain just in a vat inside of a simulated reality that it's participating participating in. Or you could represent the totality of a human mind with nothing but artificial components, and also simulate that inside of a virtual reality, right? You could do all of this if you wanted to, theoretically, at least so long as consciousness isn't substrate dependent, but whatever. I mean, for all we know, the logical end state for all life in the universe, if you presume the well-being model to be correct, might be something like filling the entire universe with Dyson sphere type machines to power colossal artificial minds constructed from disassembled star systems, with the purpose of simulating as many profoundly positively valenced conscious experiences as possible. Maybe every star in the universe becomes a mind locked in its own virtual heaven. If you find that hypothetical interesting, look into Matryoshka brains, because that's a related concept. It's kind of similar to a Dyson sphere. It's like a Dyson sphere that can compute things. Anyway, if well-being matters, if that's the thing, then every step of doing that sort of feels perfectly logical, right? Like it's the obviously right thing to do if well-being is the right context in which to think about all of this. The thought process is ultimately an extension of giving food to a hungry person, or some other obvious act of just trying to increase the well-being of everyone's conscious experience. But is such a radical abandonment of our humanity a good thing? I'm sure lots of people think it's silly to even imagine this sort of like Dyson sphere-y, Matryoshka brain, megastructure, far future stuff. But just for 1 second, put aside your practicality mind and insert your hypothetical thought experiment mind, and just consider where the path leads given our current assumptions if you run them into the distant future for a few billion years, given what we know about the universe and assuming we don't destroy ourselves before we get there. An optimized well-being universe doesn't seem unlikely? Kinda seems like it's what we all want, even if we don't put it in those words. Like, even if you think, no, it's not true, I like doing things which are sometimes uncomfortable. Well, again, it kind of folds into the greater well-being schema when you zoom out and view the entirety of your life from a bird's eye view. The idea being you're willing to accept lower well-being now for greater well-being in the future. You know, climbing a hill might be difficult, but the view at the top and the memories that you make might be worth it. But there's just something viscerally off-putting about that eventual conclusion for a lot of people. Like, just simulating positive conscious experiences without them reflecting reality. It evokes the image of like the Matrix or a Black Mirror episode or whatever, like everyone's living in a dump but their perceptions of reality are altered to make them think that things are nice when everything's terrible. Or just the feeling of meaninglessness because their existence is sort of not real in the way that we think of ours as being real. Our biological human senses at least seem to reflect what we assume is a tangible, objective, external reality. But also, one of these weird godlike interstellar mind things could be designed to not just live virtually, right? It could be designed to directly interface with the same physical reality we're interacting with, but just to extract well-being from it vastly more effectively. Maybe it would experience learning information in the same way that a human experiences an orgasm or some shit. Like, you could map new and weird types of pleasure that we don't even understand to behaviors that we don't normally associate with pleasure at all. A truly post-human entity wouldn't have to experience reality the way we do at all. Like, other animals certainly don't, and we share a literal bloodline with them. Maybe just sitting there and existing could be made to subjectively feel as incredible as the most positive high ever experienced by a human being. But again, is that the right way to design this sort of endgame post-human consciousness? Having it somewhat reflect physicality feels less false than a totally virtual reality, but shouldn't our perceptions reflect the world accurately? As in, if we shouldn't be feeling pleasure, then just don't feel any pleasure? Maybe, but then again, is the desire for that actually meaningful? Like, everything you think you know is objectively true about the physical world is actually just a fact about your conscious perceptions of a presumed physical world. Like, the colour blue doesn't exist physically, it's just an appearance within consciousness. You might think that photons with the wavelength of blue exist, but actually what exists is an experiment that you set up and do, and you look at with your consciousness. Like, ultimately, everything comes through consciousness. There's no objective way to interface with the physical universe. When most people think about the objective physical universe, if we're honest, most people actually just picture what the universe looks like to them, visually. Like, what its visual appearance is within the visual field within their consciousness, which by definition is not what we're after, right? The real physical universe is meant to be what's fundamentally underneath our experiences of consciousness, right? The objective thing that grounds all of it out. But any possibility you can come up with, anything with any qualities whatsoever, is by definition a possible appearance within consciousness, and therefore you can rule out basically anything as the nature of the physical world. So in my view, you can actually take this all the way to the point where there's kind of no coherent incoherent way for the physical world to actually exist, and therefore existence is literally just stuff appearing within consciousness, because, I'm wacky like that. I suppose I'd say the physical universe sort of exists, but it's kind of like the interference patterns you'd get with like waves on a lake. The surface of the water is like consciousness, the waves are like qualia, so the contents of consciousness, and the interference patterns that appear are apparent structure, right? Like the physical laws of our universe, but they're not separate from the waves, they are a part of the waves, they exist because of the waves. And the same thing with the universe. It exists in a sense, but it's like an emergent property of experience itself. Alright, this is going off the rails. I promise I'm not some fucking Deepak Chopra kind of guy. I have a lot of philosophical thoughts on this, but they're all wildly tangential from the conversation I'm actually meant to be having, so I'm going to get back on topic. So, well-being. Well-being is at the center of all of this. The thought that avoiding suffering and seeking pleasure is the ultimate thing that we're meant to be doing. But how true really is that? Now, you might maybe be expecting me to give one of the sort of standard retorts against utilitarianism, like how well-being, quote-unquote, seems to be unquantifiable and unmeasurable, but I'm not going to do that. I don't actually mind the whole utilitarian model. Clearly, some conscious experiences are better than others, so in some sense, there's a clear gradation, even if it's kind of vague because you're just happy. You don't have like 10 units of happiness. That's not how that works. But there are just some better and some worse subjective conscious states relative to one another. I'd rather pat a bunny than have all my skin peeled off. Even though it's hard to quantify exactly how much I'd rather do one than the other, I still would rather do one than the other. But there's something else I want to discuss about all this before I sign off here, and that's the thing that I actually really wanted to talk about. In fact, consider this something for you to ponder meditatively as homework. From the perspective of your conscious experience of reality, where is well-being? Like, which field of consciousness does it appear in? Think about it, right? There's your field of vision, there's your auditory field, there's your touch field, and so on. Which can pleasure or suffering appear within? All right, it took me ages to figure this out, and my conclusions here are literally just from me contemplating this, so let me know if you think I'm way off on this. But let's say you're looking at a picture, and it's a nice picture. Maybe it's a picture of an adorable puppy or something. Okay, ask yourself, when you look at it and you experience a pleasurable, positively valenced experience within consciousness, right? You like looking at this picture. Where is that pleasurable sensation? Like, do your eyes literally feel nice? Is there a region within your field of vision where like pleasure is emanating from? No, I don't think so. It's more of an emotional thing, right? You get like a warm fuzzy feeling in your chest or whatever. It's like a physiological bodily sensation. You don't literally see pleasure. The positive sensation appears in the field of touch, I guess you'd call it, or whatever you call it when your body feels things. For simplicity, I'm just going to call it touch. I could divide it into like touch and temperature and pain and whatever. I'm just going to call all of it touch, right? Bodily sensations. Okay, so what about when you listen to music that you like, right? I think it's the same deal. You get shivers if you really like a song or whatever. You feel it. You don't hear the pleasure. The pleasure is like a bodily feeling. Okay, but what about when you get into a nice comfy bed? Well, that one should be a bodily feeling, and it also is a bodily feeling. So it seems like every positively valenced sensation within consciousness wants to be a touch sensation for some reason. Okay, what about negative experiences? You see a horrific giant spider, and of course you feel like it's crawling on you, or you feel hot and twitchy and anxious about if it's going to fucking leap at you or whatever. But again, you feel that suffering, like it's emotional. You feel it like in the body, right? Again, you don't see the suffering. The suffering doesn't occur within your visual field. I mean, even if you literally shine a fucking light directly into your eyeball, right? Don't do that, by the way. But if you did, you'd be in pain. But I'd go as far as to say that you're not seeing the pain, you're feeling the pain. You're feeling it in the location where your eye is. But it's the touch field of consciousness that you're experiencing the suffering in. Same for if you're listening to terrible music, same for if someone's being annoying near you or whatever, and same obviously with getting walloped by something. All positively and negatively valenced conscious experiences seem to want to appear within basically the bodily like touch field of consciousness. The valence, so the positiveness or the negativeness, subjectively feels like it's occurring like in your body, like touch sensation, right? I think it's a weird apparent asymmetry in consciousness. Feel free to go away and think about that one, but I'd say that this is something to do with your mind subconsciously realizing that something is either helpful to survival or not helpful to survival, and it responds emotionally. The emotion is ultimately a physiological reaction, so it's like a physical, like a bodily sensation that you end up having, and then I think it causes a feedback loop. Your mind notices the physical sensation, and it uses all the other fields of awareness for context to know whether it should continue the feedback loop where the feeling makes you think a certain thing, and then that thought makes you feel it, and then the feeling makes you think it, and back and forth, or whether it should stop doing that. I guess this happens via bodily sensations just for some evolutionary reason. So anyway, that's where pleasure or suffering always seem to occur within human consciousness, which is interesting to think about. Like even thoughts, like bad thoughts or good thoughts or whatever, feel good or bad because they produce that emotional feeling within your body. But here's a level deeper. We've been thinking of the sensation of bodily pain or discomfort as bad and of pleasure as good, but I think that's not quite right. It's not wrong, but it's not the whole story. I think there's one other thing that we need to understand. See, I think that you can recontextualize basically any sensation to be good or bad if you want to. You can literally think away suffering, which sounds insane, but hear me out, right? Like if your arm hurts a lot, like it's really painful, you might think, oh, that's definitely a bad thing, right? But let's say it hurts because you just beat your lifting record, or because you're getting an injection that you know is going to save your life, or because someone's doing a massage thing on you and in 2 seconds they're going to stop doing it, and you know for a fact it's going to feel amazing the second they stop because you've been having some problem and this is going to fix it or whatever, right? Like the context kind of is everything. Like as another example, anxiety and excitement are physiologically essentially identical to each other. It's just the way that you think about it that makes you experience those two things differently. And here's another one. If you're ever experiencing pain, like a really bad, like a stomach cramp or something, try really hard to not think of yourself as a mind in a brain being tortured by the pain that you're enduring. Instead, try to think of yourself as just the sum of your fields of consciousness. There's no self in the middle of it. You aren't enduring what's happening to you. There are only the fields. You are just the fields of awareness in which experience happens to be taking place. And whatever it is that's in those fields of awareness, don't judge it. Don't say it's good or bad. Just let it be what it is. This is very hard to do, but I think at least to some degree, you can just right out of the gate do this. Or at least I can do it a little bit. I definitely can't do it perfectly, but if I'm in genuinely a lot of pain with something, this can actually really honestly help a lot. Like to some degree, it's as though there's no innate suffering, but suffering exists, but it's only when there's kind of an illusion of the self that you think is real and you're torturing it with what's happening. But it doesn't actually exist. It's not a real thing. There's not like a thing inside your brain that's like you. In fact, it's almost like pain and suffering are two different things. Like physical, pain or pleasure or whatever, they are positively or negatively valenced qualia, right? The contents of consciousness. But suffering, like actual real suffering, is when you sort of mentally conceptualize yourself as the agent separate from the contents of consciousness, being tortured by the contents of consciousness, right? I think that's what makes it truly capital B bad. So, personally, I don't think that those negatively valenced appearances within consciousness are actually bad in the ultimate sense. I think they're all neutral, right? Getting kicked in the balls or eating pizza are actually both equivalent on some very, not to most of us, that's not how we experience it, but you could get to a state where you would actually not mind the difference between either of them, genuinely. I think that is actually possible. I mean, monks have managed to burn themselves alive and just meditate through the fucking pain, so there must be something to this. So basically, if you've got a really negatively valenced experience, something that we would normally call suffering, I think what that really means is that experience is hard to simply accept and relax into. But the opposite is true with pleasurable experiences, right? You can just lean into them. You totally lose yourself in them. You literally cease to have a defined sense of self. Like if you're engrossed in a movie or a video game or whatever, you don't think of yourself as this separate thing that's watching the movie. You just you almost merge into the movie. You forget you're even watching a movie. You just become the movie. Whereas in painful experiences, generally the opposite is true. And I think that's really the key here, going all the way back to the concept of transhumanism. What are we optimizing for? Well, maybe we'll optimize for positively valenced experiences within consciousness. However, I think the real goal, the actual way to maximize well-being, if you want to call it that, comes from, yes, acquiring a contented mind, but using that contented mind as a jumping off point for being able to clearly understand the actual nature of consciousness. It's like the whole Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing. You want to get as high up the pyramid as possible by having a life that isn't shitty. The best lives are near the top, and I think the very top is realizing that actually, even though when you were lower down you were suffering, in retrospect you can realize the kind of equanimity of all of it, and if you really integrated it properly, you could get put back onto a lower level and actually feel kind of content and indifferent about that. So yeah, I think the real goal comes from being able to clearly understand the actual nature of consciousness, because only then can a conscious being realize, I guess, the equivalence between all the different possible experiences within consciousness without judging them and therefore suffering as a result of them. So, going back to the original question, should we use technology to evolve past the point where we lose our humanity? Well, I think if it helps us get to the point that I'd like to move to, then maybe. I think the tragedy wouldn't be us losing our humanity. It's maybe a bit of a red herring. I think it would only be a tragedy to trade our humanity in pursuit of the wrong thing. If we throw ourselves at hedonism, but we don't use those amazing, pleasurable experiences as a jumping off point to reach true equanimity within our experience of consciousness, I think we've missed an important step. Whew, Jesus, that was fucking deep. Alright, thanks as always to my elite level supporters. Thunderbolt22A10, who got himself even more bitches for Christmas. Nomad Greg, who was named Alpha Centauri's zestiest mollusk. Andrew Mole, who achieved a state of consciousness known as Turbo Hungry. John Bejarano, who dips his nips in chocolate chips. JDK, whose real name requires 8 tongues to pronounce. Mutantious Doom, who has a wooden leg with a real foot. Stormester Ritter, who will have 2 number 9s, a number 9 large, a number 6 with extra dip, a number 7, 2 number 45s, 1 with cheese. And a large soda. Nikita Lurie, who wears underpants 47% of the time. Aaron Rowe, who lactates tequila. Bonk Chunk, who makes a mean grilled cheese. And thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to join the Patreon or the channel membership if you want to be featured in my video credits or chat on Discord. And as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.